You're looking at one of the most famous structures on the entire planet. It's a symbol of democracy, a masterpiece of art. But for the last 2 centuries, it's also been at the heart of a really bitter international dispute, a kind of cultural tug-of-war that makes you ask, who actually owns history?
And right here, this is the puzzle at the very center of that whole debate. You can go to Athens and you can see the magnificent Parthenon temple. But if you want to see many of its original, most famous sculptures, you have to get on a plane and go to a museum in London. So how on earth did one of the world's greatest treasures get split in 2 like this?
To really get a handle on this modern-day conflict, we have to go way back to its ancient beginnings. I mean, what did the Acropolis actually mean to the people of Athens back in the 5th century BC, when they were at the absolute height of their power under their legendary leader, Pericles?
Well, its name pretty much tells you everything you need to know. It was the highest city, the sacred, beating heart of ancient Athens, and its main point of defense. But it was so much more than that. It was this spectacular monument celebrating a brand new idea they had called democracy. And it was a triumphant statement of their culture and power, especially after they had just defeated the massive Persian Empire.
But that golden age, as incredible as it was, that was really just one chapter in a much, much longer story. The story of the Acropolis is one of glory, for sure, but it's also a story of ruin, of being constantly reinvented, and of some pretty violent transformations along the way.
Just look at this timeline. It shows you just how unbelievably resilient this place was. See, the Parthenon was never just some static ruin people looked at. It was a living, breathing part of the city. It was turned into a Christian church during the Byzantine era. Then, later on, under Ottoman rule, it actually became a mosque. They even added a minaret to it. It was a building that just kept adapting, changing with whatever empire was in charge.
And then came this moment, the single most destructive event in its entire history. During a siege, the Ottoman forces who were occupying Athens were using the Parthenon to store their gunpowder. When a Venetian cannonball scored a direct hit, the explosion was absolutely catastrophic. It literally blew the roof clean off, shattered the walls, and left the Parthenon in ruins for over 100 years. And that explosion, right there, set the stage for the whole controversy we're talking about today.
Okay, so let's jump forward in time to the early 1800s. Greece is still part of the Ottoman Empire, and this Scottish nobleman, Thomas Bruce, you probably know him as Lord Elgin, he shows up in Athens as the British ambassador. And what he does over the next few years, well, it's going to light a fire that is still burning hot today.
So this brings us right to the heart of it, the big question. Did Lord Elgin rescue priceless works of art from being destroyed forever, or did he illegally plunder them? The answer, it turns out, is incredibly complicated, and the whole thing pretty much hangs on one single, very controversial piece of paper.
On the surface, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? A letter giving his team permission to take away pieces of stone. But the real meaning of this permission, who really had the authority to give it, and what those words actually meant, well, that has been the source of 2 centuries of really bitter arguments.
Yeah, the legal side of this gets very murky very fast. First off, this wasn't an official royal decree, a firman from the Sultan himself. It was just a letter from a much lower-level official. It also specifically said that no harm should be done to the building, but Elgin's crews used saws and crowbars to literally hack the sculptures right off the walls. And then maybe the biggest problem of all? The original document is gone. It is completely vanished. All we have is an Italian translation of it.
And then, of course, there's the money. Research suggests that the presents that Elgin gave to the governor of Athens were worth about 35 times the guy's annual salary. That has led to some really serious accusations that whatever permission he got, well, it was secured through what looks a lot like an outright bribe. So, with all that complicated history on the table, let's unpack the arguments from the British Museum's point of view, the case for why the marbles were acquired fairly and why they should stay exactly where they are.
Okay, so the argument for keeping them is built on a few key ideas. First is the idea of rescue, that Elgin saved these sculptures from a site that was totally neglected, where locals were literally grinding up ancient marble to make lime. Second, that in a global museum, like the British Museum, they're seen in the context of all of world history, not just Greek history. Third, that having them in London has inspired artists and scholars for generations. And this is a crucial point for them. In 1816, the British Parliament investigated the whole thing and then voted to legally purchase the collection from Elgin for the nation.
All right, now let's flip the coin and turn to the other side of this fight. Let's explore the really passionate and persistent case for returning the sculptures to Greece. The Greek argument really centers on some powerful ideas. First, that the legality of the removal was questionable right from the start. Second, they see it as an act of aesthetic desecration. It's like tearing random chapters out of a book. These sculptures weren't just a bunch of pretty objects. They were an essential part of a single, unified work of art. And finally, they argue the marbles are a foundational piece of Greek national identity, and that the stunning, modern Acropolis Museum now stands right there at the foot of the hill, built for one single purpose: to reunite the sculptures with the temple they were made for.
So after 200 years, the two sides are still at a total impasse. And this stalemate really forces all of us to think about a much bigger question, one about ownership, about history, and what cultural heritage even means in our world today.
The fate of these sculptures really leaves us with this profound question. Does a piece of cultural heritage like this belong to one specific nation as a core symbol of its identity? Or does it belong to the entire world, something to be shared and studied in global museums? At the end of the day, who gets to be the keeper of history?